Helpless, broken, ashamed. My father and my brother did that. Laya Hart's voice cracked on the last word, and the sound of it seemed louder than the summer wind rolling across the simmering river. She was on her knees in the dirt outside Caleb Mercer's ranch gate, her back pressed against a sunburned wooden post, dust clinging to her tear-streaked face. Her knees were dark with bruises. Her lip was split. One side of her cheek was swollen. Caleb stood over her, 52 years old, broad-shouldered, gray touching his beard, one hand resting near the Colt at his hip, from the road. It would have looked wrong. A young woman in the dirt, an older rancher towering above her, a gun within reach. For a long second, he didn't move. The metal of the Colt gave a faint click as his thumb brushed the hammer without meaning to. Laya flinched at that sound, not because she feared him. Because she feared what came with that sound. Caleb saw it. He slowly lifted both hands away from the gun and stepped back one pace so his shadow no longer covered her legs. "Who did this?" he asked. She swallowed hard, chest shaking. "My father," she said again, forcing air into her lungs. "And my brother." The wind moved through the dry grass. Somewhere beyond the low ridge east of the ranch, a faint cloud of dust lifted along the road. Caleb noticed it. He didn't mention it yet. Everyone near Dodge City knew Ezekiel Pike. Church on Sunday, had Tip polite in town. Hard eyes behind closed doors. And Wade Pike, his grown son from before Illa's mother, quick to anger, quicker to use his fists. Laya's real father had died when she was a child. Her mother remarried Ezekiel when her mother passed. The house turned quiet in the wrong way. No more laughter, no more shield, just orders, locks, and in silence. "They locked me in the feed shed this morning," she said. They rode into Dodge to meet him. Caleb's jaw tightened. Meet who? She looked up at him then, and there was something worse than fear in her eyes. Humiliation. "They're trading me to clear his debts. Call it marriage if you want. It's still a price." The word hung between them. Trading. Not love, not choice, just debt. A breeze shifted the dust at their feet. Caleb glanced once more toward the road. The dust cloud was larger now. Still far, but moving. "There's an old man in town," Laya went on. "He's got money. They said I'd be his wife before the month's out. And if I refused, Wade said he'd make sure I had no choice." Her voice broke again. Caleb removed his hat and set it on the ground beside him. He crouched so they were level. "You ran here," he said. She nodded. "I didn't know where else to go." She'd been running since noon. And her legs finally quit on her at Caleb's gate. That sentence settled heavy in the heat. Caleb Mercer had spent years minding his own fence, fixing what was his, ignoring what wasn't. He had heard shouting from the Pike place before. He had told himself it was none of his concern. Now, the concern was kneeling in his dirt. And if he chose to step in, it would not stay quiet. Ezekiel Pike had friends. He had debts tied to half the county. Sheriff Harlan liked peace more than trouble. Harlan also knew Pike owed money around the stockyard and debt can bend a town. A man's name in western Kansas weighed more than a girl's bruises. If Caleb rode against Pike, he would not just face one angry father. He would risk his cattle contract, his standing at the stockyard, his word in town, and his life. The dust cloud rose higher on the horizon. Hooves, not imagination, railed closer. Laya heard them. "Two. They'll come," she whispered. "Yes," Caleb said, "they will." He stood slowly and checked the Colt at his side. Not dramatic, not wild, just practical. He opened the cylinder and glanced at the round stock full. He closed it with a soft click. That sound didn't make Laya flinch this time. It made her breathe a little steadier. Most men think trouble starts with a gun. It doesn't. It starts with a story told first. Caleb knew Pike would ride straight to town and start talking the moment he turned around. He'd paint himself as a grieving father. He'd paint Caleb as a predator. And he'd paint Laya as a liar. 2. That was the danger, not just fists. Not just iron, a town choosing what to believe. Caleb extended his hand, palm open. After a pause, Laya placed her trembling fingers in his. "So," he helped her stand. She winced but didn't cry out. He guided her toward the barn, keeping his body between her and the road. "If they ride in here," she asked softly, "will you send me back?" The hooves were louder now, and the dust line on the road was closing fast. Caleb stopped at the barn door. For years, he had told himself that staying out of other men's fights kept a ranch alive. For years, he had chosen quiet over conflict. A man could mind his own fence, or he could decide which side of it he stood on. Caleb looked toward the ridge as two figures began to shape themselves against the glare. Then he looked at the girl beside him, bruised, but standing. "No," he said. And as the riders crested the hill, the distance between them shrinking with every stride, Caleb Mercer stepped forward into the open yard, hand resting calm and ready at his side. The hooves were close now, close enough to shake the dust from the fence posts, close enough that whatever happened next would not stay between neighbors. So the question was no longer whether he would get involved. The question was this: when Ezekiel Pike rode through that gate, would Caleb Mercer meet him with law, with force, or with something neither man was prepared for? The riders crested the ridge in a cloud of red Kansas dust. 2 horses, 2 men. Caleb didn't need the sun in his eyes to know who they were. Ezekiel Pike rode straight back, hat low, face set like stone. Wade rode half a length behind, already leaning forward in the saddle like a man eager for trouble. Laya stood just inside the barn door. Caleb stepped out into the open yard. He didn't reach for his gun. He didn't wave. He simply waited. The hooves slowed as the man entered the gate without asking. Ezekiel's eyes went past Caleb, searching. "You seen my daughter?" he asked, voice calm, almost polite. Caleb kept his tone steady. "I've seen a girl who needed help." Wade spat into the dirt. "She's sick." Wade said, "She gets ideas." Caleb didn't answer that. Instead, he said, "You lock sick girls in sheds now." The air tightened. Ezekiel's jaw moved once, like he was chewing on something bitter. "She ran from her home," he said. "That makes her my concern and mine." Caleb replied for a moment. Nobody moved. A breeze pushed the dust between them. Then Wade swung down from his saddle. Boots hitting hard, he started toward the barn. Caleb stepped sideways, blocking the path without touching him. "Don't," Caleb said. It was not loud. It didn't need to be. Wade squared up, chest out. "You aiming to keep her here?" he asked. "You aiming to steal what ain't yours?" That word hung there. Steal. Caleb almost smiled at the way it twisted the truth. "You planning to sell what ain't yours?" Caleb answered, "That did it." Wade lunged, not with a gun, with his hands. He grabbed for Caleb's shirt. Caleb caught his wrist and turned his weight the way a man who had thrown hay bales for 30 years knew how to turn it. No wild punches, no shouting, just leverage. Wade hit the dirt hard enough to lose his breath. Ezekiel slid from his horse, hand near his own holster. "Now careful," he warned. Caleb released Wade and stepped back, palms open again. "I don't want blood in my yard," he said. "Take him and go." Ezekiel studied him. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "That girl's under my roof." "Not today," Caleb replied. The 2 men locked eyes. This was not about shouting. It was about standing, finally. Ezekiel grabbed Wade by the collar and hauled him up. "This isn't finished," he said. Then they mounted and rode back the way they had come, dust rising behind them. Caleb waited until they disappeared beyond the ridge before he let out the breath he had been holding. Laya stepped out into the sunlight. "They'll come back," she said. "Yes," he answered. "But next time it won't be just fists." He looked toward Dodge City, half a day by horse. If he rode there now, he could get ahead of the story. Because Ezekiel would not waste time, he would ride into town and tell Sheriff Harlan that Caleb Mercer had taken a young woman from her lawful guardian. He would say she was confused, unwell. He would say Caleb had been watching her for years. In western Kansas, a man's reputation was as valuable as his herd. Once it was trampled, it didn't stand up easy. Liz' shoulders sagged. "I didn't mean to drag you into this," she said. Caleb shook his head. "You didn't drag me," he said. "I stepped." He walked to the water trough and splashed his face. The water was warm from the sun. He needed to think. Ezekiel had gone to Dodge that morning to meet a man named Silas Crowley. That meant papers, money, a witness. If there was a deal being made, it would leave a mark somewhere. And there was one person in Dodge City who watched marks better than most. Aunt May Hart, Illa's mother's sister, owner of the general store near Front Street. May heard everything. Farmers talked while buying flour. Cowboys talked while buying tobacco. And men who thought they were clever often talked too much when they thought nobody important was. Listening, Caleb turned back to Laya. "Can you ride?" he asked. She nodded once. "I can." "Good," he said. "We go to town before they do." Her eyes widened. "What if the sheriff sends me back?" "That depends," Caleb said. "On what?" "On who's standing with you." He walked toward the barn to saddle his horse. His movements were steady, measured, not rushed, but there was no hesitation in him. He checked the cinch twice. Checked the colt again. Not because he wanted to use it, because a man heading into trouble didn't go careless. Laya watched him from the doorway. "You ever been against Ezekiel before?" she asked. Caleb paused. "No," he said. "Most folks haven't." There was a hint of dry humor in his voice. "Man like him doesn't fight in the open unless he's sure he'll win." He mounted and looked down at her. "You ready?" She took a breath and nodded again. As they rode out of the yard, Caleb felt the weight of what he was doing settle on his shoulders. If he failed, Laya would be forced back. If he succeeded halfway, he might lose his name in town. If he pushed too hard, it could turn into something nobody could pull back from. The road toward Dodge City stretched ahead in a thin line of dust. Caleb kept the pace steady. Too fast looked guilty, too slow looked short. He watched every rider that passed. Every wagon that creaked by, because any one of them could carry Pike's version into town. First, Laya rode quiet, but Caleb could
feel her fear in the way she held the reins. He didn't tell her it would be fine. Men like Pike didn't stop because a good man asked. They stopped when they were forced. Behind them, the Pike ranch sat quiet over the ridge. Too quiet. Caleb didn't look back. Sometimes you mind your own fence and sometimes you choose a side. They rode in silence for a while. The rhythm of hooves steady under the hot Kansas sun up ahead. A faint shape moved on the road. Another rider heading toward town. Caleb narrowed his eyes. If that was Ezekiel taking the short trail, then this race had already begun. And in Dodge City, whoever spoke first often shaped the truth. If you want to see how this ride into town turns and who stands with them when the dust settles, make sure you're subscribed, pour yourself a cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and tell me in the comments what time it is where you are listening from, because the next stop is Dodge City. And in that town, words can wound deeper than bullets. Dodge City shimmered in the late afternoon heat like a mirage made of wood and dust. The boardwalks creaked. A freight wagon rattled past. Wheels grinding against hard-packed earth, Caleb and Laya rode in from the south road, not fast enough to look desperate, not slow enough to look unsure. In towns like this, pace mattered. If you rushed, people smelled trouble. If you crept, they smelled guilt. Caleb kept his shoulders loose in the saddle. Laya rode half a step behind him, hat pulled low, bruises faintly hidden in shadow, a few heads turned. They always did. Folks knew Caleb Mercer. They also knew the Pike Ranch. And in a place like Dodge City, news rode faster than horses. They tied up outside Aunt May Hart's general store, the bell above. The door jingled as they stepped inside. Cooler air, flour sacks stacked neat, barrels of beans and sugar along the wall. Aunt May stood behind the counter. Sleeves rolled, grey hair pinned tight. She'd found a crumpled paper near her backstep the day before with Pike's name on it. She kept it because trouble always leaves paper behind. She looked up once, then again. Her eyes went straight to Illa's face. May didn't gasp. She didn't fuss. She walked around the counter and touched Illa's chin gently, turning her face toward the light. "That's enough," May said softly. Then she looked at Caleb. "They've gone too far." Caleb nodded once. "They're riding this way." May's expression didn't change. But something hard settled behind her eyes. "Back room," she said. Laya hesitated. Caleb gave a small nod. "It's safe," he said. May led Laya through a narrow doorway behind the counter. Caleb stayed near the front window, watching the street through the thin lace curtain, and there it was, dust. Two riders coming in from the north end this time. Ezekiel didn't waste time. The store door swung open before the dust even settled. Ezekiel Pike stepped in like a man entering church, composed.
Wade followed, jaw tight, eyes already scanning. "Afternoon, May." Ezekiel said. May returned to the counter as if nothing in the world were out of place. No, Ezekiel. He glanced at Caleb Mercer Pike. Short flat. Ezekiel rested one hand lightly on the counter. My girl wandered off this morning. He said, confused state. Figured she might have come this way. Caleb didn't move. She's not confused. He said she's scared. Wade shifted his weight. You got no right. Wade snapped. Caleb met his eyes. Try me. A couple of customers near the coffee barrel pretended not to listen, but they were listening. Everyone was Ezekiel's side as if burdened by foolish men. Sheriff Harlan and I spoke already. Now, he said he agrees a father's got claim over his household that landed. Caleb felt it. If Ezekiel had reached the sheriff first, then the ground was already tilted. May's voice cut in. Calm and steady. Claim don't cover bruises, she said. Ezekiel's eyes flicked to her. Careful, May. He replied. This is family business. May leaned forward slightly. She is family. The room went still. Wade moved toward the back hallway. Caleb stepped in front of him. Not today, Caleb said. Wade shoved him hard. Was not a wild swing this time. It was mean and direct. Caleb absorbed it and shoved back. They crashed into a barrel of nails that clattered across the wooden floor. Gasps filled the store. Wade swung. Caleb ducked and drove his shoulder into Wade's chest. They hit the floor hard. No fancy moves, just weight and grip. Wade clawed for Caleb's collar. Caleb caught his wrist and pinned it down. Enough, Caleb said through clenched teeth. Ezekiel's voice rose sharp. Now that's assault. You're witnesses, he called to the room. Mercer attacks in broad daylight. There it was. The turn, the twist of truth. The store door opened again. Sheriff Harlan stepped in, hand resting near his badge, eyes already tired. What's this? The sheriff asked. Ezekiel straightened his coat. My daughter's been taken. He said, I came peaceful. Caleb stood slowly, breathing hard. She came to me, he said. She said they're trading her to clear Pike's debts. A murmur ran through the room. Debt. The word didn't sit easy. Sheriff Harlan looked from one man to the other. Is that so? He asked Ezekiel. Ezekiel gave a thin smile. Stories, he said. She's young. Imaginative. May's voice came firm. She's in my back room. She can speak for herself. Sheriff Harlan hesitated. He knew Pike's name carried weight, but he also knew every eye in that store would remember what he did next. In towns like Dodge City, hesitation was everything if he decided to quit. He risked choosing wrong in front of half them. County, if she's here, he said slowly. She comes out and speaks calm. Wade smirked. Caleb saw it. Wood was counting on fear, counting on Laya freezing under eyes and pressure. May disappeared into the back without another word. The store felt smaller now, tighter. Caleb glanced at the sheriff. If you send her back without hearing all of it, he said quietly, you'll be signing off on more than bruises. Sheriff Harlan didn't answer. Footsteps approached from the back room. Layla stepped into the light. She looked pale. But she was standing straight. Wade's smirk faded. Ezekiel's jaw tightened. Every eye in the store shifted to her. And before a single word left her mouth, another shadow fell across the doorway. A tall, well-dressed older man stepped inside, brushing dust from his coat. Caleb had seen him once before near the stockyard, Silas Crowley, and the way Ezekiel's shoulders eased when he saw him told Caleb one thing clear. This was not just a family fight, this was business. And Silas Crowley had just walked in at the worst possible moment. Silas Crowley removed his gloves slowly, like a man who never hurried unless money was running away from him. He was older than Caleb by a few years. Well-fed, clean coat, boots that had seen town more than trailed. He gave Sheriff Harlan a polite nod. Sheriff, he said. Then he looked at Laya. Not like a father, not like a neighbor, like a buyer judging a horse. Caleb saw it and Laya saw it too. Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't step back. Ezekiel cleared his throat. Mr. Crowley was just leaving town, he said smoothly. Business arrangement. Silas folded his gloves and slipped them into his pocket. I believe there's been some misunderstanding, he said. His voice was soft. Practiced. I was told the young lady agreed. The room shifted again. Agreed. That word was meant to wash everything clean. Laya's hands trembled, but she spoke clear. I never agreed to nothing. Wade scoffed. You don't even know what agreeing means. Caleb took one step forward. Careful, he said quietly. Sheriff Harlan lifted a hand. Enough, he said. He looked at Laya. You saying your stepfather tried to arrange a marriage against your will? Yes, she answered. Sheriff turned to Silas. And you? Silas gave a small shrug. I was told she was willing, he said. I don't conduct business in force. Business? There it was again. Caleb watched Ezekiel closely. Not his mouth, his eyes. A man's eyes told the truth before his tongue did. Ezekiel was not angry. He was calculating. That meant he thought he still had control. May stepped behind the counter and reached under it. For a second, Caleb thought she might be reaching for a shotgun. Instead, she pulled out a small tin box. She opened it slowly. Inside were folded papers tied with string. I keep receipts, May said calmly. Orders, notes, and letters folks forget they left behind. She pulled out one folded sheet and placed it on the counter. Ezekiel's jaw tightened. Silas's gaze sharpened. May looked at the sheriff. This was dropped here yesterday, she said. By mistake. She slid it across. Sheriff Harlan unfolded it. The paper was simple, plain, but the words were clear. An agreement. A payment promised in exchange for marriage meant to settle debts, a sum large enough to wipe Pike clean at the stockyard, signed by Ezekiel Pike. Silas Crowley's name written below as witness. The room went quiet. Wade stepped forward. That don't prove nothing, he snapped. Caleb didn't look at Wade. He looked at Silas. You witness a marriage, Caleb said, or a purchase. Silas's face didn't change, but the skin around his eyes tightened. I witness arrangements, he said. Sheriff Harlan read the amount again. He knew what that number meant. He knew what kind of debt it cleared. And he knew that if this turned ugly, Dodge City would be talking about it for years. Ezekiel's calm cracked for the first time. She's under my roof, he said sharply. I decide. Laya's voice cut through. You ate my blood. That hit harder than any fist. Wade lunged again, not at Caleb this time, but toward Laya. Caleb moved without thinking. He caught Wade mid-step and drove him back into a display of flour sacks. White dust burst into the air. Customers scattered. Sheriff Harlan grabbed for WD's arm. Enough, the sheriff barked. This time there was steel in it. Harlan didn't like trouble, but he hated looking weak in front of a full store. Wade struggled, but two other men in the store stepped in. Ranchers, men who had daughters of their own. They held Wade firm. Silas stepped back from the counter. Calculating distance. Distance from trouble. Distance from blame. Caleb saw it. That was the crack. Silas cared about his name more than he cared about Ezekiel. You wrote this, Caleb said, nodding at the paper. You can't wash your hands now. Silas adjusted his coat. I wrote what I was told was lawful, he replied. If the young lady says otherwise, I withdraw. There it was, withdrawal. Quick and clean. Silas had a name around the stockyard, too. And he wasn't about to let it get muddied over Pike's mess. Ezekiel stared at him in disbelief. You can't just step aside, Ezekiel hissed. Silas met his eyes coolly. I can, he said. And I will. The sheriff folded the paper slowly. Ezekiel, he said, you want to explain this? Ezekiel's face darkened. It's that, he said. It's arrangement. It's my right. Sheriff shook his head. Right. Don't look like this. For the first time, the balance shifted. Not fully, but enough. Sheriff looked at Laya again. You willing to testify? He asked. She nodded. Double quotes yes. Ezekiel's breathing grew heavy. He glanced toward the door, toward the street, toward escape. Caleb saw it coming before anyone else. Wade jerked free from one rancher's grip and swung wild. It was enough distraction. Ezekiel bolted. He shoved past the sheriff and burst through the door into the sunlight. Wade tore loose a second later. Sheriff Harlan cursed and ran after them. Caleb followed to the doorway. Outside, dust was already rising again. Ezekiel and Wade were on their horses, spurring hard down the north road. Silas remained inside the store, silent, watching his investment disappear. Caleb stepped into the street, squinting against the glare. This was no longer a quiet dispute. Now it was pursuit. And men running from the law didn't ride back to talk. They rode to hide or to strike first. Caleb turned back to May and Laya. "This isn't over," he said. May nodded once. "No," she agreed. It just got louder up the north road beyond the bend where the cottonwoods thin lay open land and the edge of the Cimarron. And if Ezekiel Pike chose that ground for what came next, there would be no counter, no witnesses, and no easy way back. Because a desperate man with nothing left to lose was far more dangerous than one still pretending to bargain. Sheriff Harlan's horse kicked up dust as he rode hard up the north road. But Ezekiel Pike knew that land better than any lawman in Dodge City. Caleb didn't wait to be asked. He was already moving. "May stay with her," he said, quick and steady. Laya grabbed his sleeve. "Don't let them disappear," she said. "I won't." Caleb answered. That was not a promise made light. He mounted in one smooth motion and pushed his horse into a fast, controlled run. Not reckless, not wild. Just fast enough to close distance without burning the animal out ahead. He could see two riders splitting off near the cottonwoods. Smart move. If they reached the shallow bends along the Cimarron River, tracks would scatter and time would slip away. Caleb leaned forward slightly. He knew that ground, too. He had driven cattle across it in dry years. There was one narrow crossing where the bank dipped low and the mud held deep. If Ezekiel aimed for it, he would have to slow. And slowing meant vulnerability. Sheriff Harlan was a good man, but not a fast thinker. When dust started flying, Caleb angled his horse west instead of straight north. Cut them off, not chase. Anticipate. The wind whipped past his ears. His mind stayed calm. Ezekiel was not riding to hide. He was riding to reset the board. A man like that would not run far. He would circle back when he thought he had leverage again. As Caleb crested a small rise, he saw them wade first. Angry even in the saddle, Ezekiel behind him, scanning the land. They spotted Caleb at the same moment. Wade jerked his reins hard. Ezekiel raised a hand, signaling him to steady. They slowed near the muddy crossing. Caleb pulled his horse to a halt about 30 yards away. Not too close, not too far. Sheriff Harlan was still a good stretch behind. This was between men now. "You chasing ghosts?" "Mercer," Ezekiel called out, "or you think you're the law today?" Caleb kept his voice level. "I think you made a mistake running." Wade laughed harsh. "You got nothing," he said. "That paper don't mean jail." "Maybe not," Caleb replied. "But your temper does." That landed. Wade's face flushed red. Ezekiel shot him a look. "Quiet. Control, always control. You should have stayed out." Ezekiel said, "You got cattle to worry about." "Same as I do." Caleb shook his head slightly. "Difference is," he said, "I don't treat people like livestock." Silence stretched between them. The river moved slow behind. A hawk circled high above. For a second, it almost felt like two ranchers discussing fence lines. Then Wade moved first. He swung down from his horse and stepped forward, boots sinking slightly in mud. "You want to settle it," he said. "Let's settle it." He didn't draw a gun. He wanted fists, personal. Caleb dismounted, too. He handed his reins loose, letting his horse drift aside. No audience. No counter, just open land and hard truth. Wade charged. This time there was no wooden floor, no flour sacks, just dirt. Wade swung wide and fast. Caleb took the hit on his shoulder and drove his forearm across WD's chest, pushing him off balance. They grappled. Mud splashed. Boots slid. Wade was younger, stronger in raw force. Caleb was steadier, measured. He let Wade burn through his anger in the first 30 seconds. Let him swing. Let him breathe heavy. Then Caleb shifted his weight, hooked WD's leg, and sent him down into the wet bank near the river. Wade came up spitting mud. Furious, he reached toward his belt, not for a gun, for a knife. Caleb's hand dropped into his Colt, but he didn't draw. Instead, he stepped forward fast and kicked Wade's wrist. The knife fell into the mud. Caleb pinned WD's arm with his boot. "Enough," he said, breath controlled. Sheriff Harlan finally rode up, gun drawn, but pointed low. "That's enough," the sheriff echoed. Ezekiel had not moved during the fight. He sat on his horse, watching, calculating. When Wade was hauled up by the sheriff, Ezekiel spoke again. "You think this changes anything?" he said to Caleb. "You think town will stand behind you when I start talking?" Caleb looked at him steady. "What you planning to say?" Ezekiel smiled thin. That you've had your eye on that girl for years. That you saw your chance. That you wanted her for yourself. The accusation hung heavy. It was ugly. And in a town where stories mattered. It could spread fast. Sheriff Harlan frowned. You better choose your next words careful, he said to Ezekiel, but the damage was planted. Caleb felt it. A rumor like that didn't need proof. It only needed repetition. Ezekiel nudged his horse back a step. You can drag us in, he said. You can wave papers, but you can't control what men whisper when you're not around. There it was. The real weapon, not fists. Not knives. Reputation. Caleb didn't answer right away. He bent down, picked up the muddy knife, and handed it to the sheriff handle first. Then he faced Ezekiel. If I wanted her, Caleb said calm and clear, I would have taken her. When nobody was looking, the words cut through the air. I'm standing here in front of you because I don't. Sheriff Harlan nodded once. That's enough for now, he said. He moved to secure WDE's wrist. Ezekiel looked from the sheriff to Caleb. The fight was not over. Not in his mind, not yet. As the sheriff began leading Wade back toward town, Ezekiel suddenly spurred his horse hard toward the shallow crossing. Caleb's eyes snapped to the far bank. If Ezekiel reached the old hunting shack beyond the bend. There were rifles stored there from last winter. And that would turn this into something far worse. Caleb grabbed his raise. The river mud splashed. Hi! Ezekiel was already halfway across and on the far side, hidden in the tall grass. Something metallic caught the sun. Ezekiel's horse lunged through the shallow crossing. Water and mud splashing high into the late afternoon sun. Caleb didn't hesitate. He spurred forward, guiding his horse into the river at an angle, not straight on. He knew this bend, knew where the mud swallowed hooves and where the gravel held firm. Ezekiel reached the far bank first and swung down near the old hunting shack, half hidden in tall grass. That metallic flash Caleb had seen was real. A rifle leaned against the cabin wall, Wade shouted. From behind the sheriff, but the wind tore his words apart. The river whispered secrets as Ezekiel faced Caleb, the water a cold, unforgiving witness between them. For weeks, their feud had simmered, a bitter pot threatening to boil over. Ezekiel's words were sharp, each one a stone skipped across the water. Aimed to wound, he spoke of betrayal, of land and honor lost, his hand resting on the hilt of the blade at his side. The air grew thick with unspoken threats, the kind that hang heavy before a storm. Caleb listened, his own anger a hot coal in his chest. He could meet Ezekiel's fury with his own. He could draw his weapon, let the river run red, and end this feud in a clash of steel. The path of violence was a well-trodden one, easy to follow. He felt the pull of it, the siren song of vengeance promising a swift, satisfying release. His knuckles were white, his jaw tight. But as he looked at Ezekiel, he didn't just see an enemy. He saw a man consumed by the same pain that gnawed at him. He saw the reflection of his own potential for hatred. Was this the man he wanted to be? One who answered bitterness with bloodshed? No, in that moment, by the rushing water, Caleb made a choice. He unclenched his fists. He would not let this feud define him or destroy another life. He lowered his gaze, not in defeat, but in a show of strength far greater than any weapon. Ezekiel, he said, his voice steady. No more. This ends here, not with swords, but with sense. The surprise on Ezekiel's face was a crack in his hardened mask. The tension didn't vanish, but it shifted, like the river's current finding a new path. It was the beginning of a different kind of resolution, one built not on victory, but on the quiet courage to choose peace. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more. Harlan stepped in and took it away. Ezekiel Pike's shoulders shivered for the first time that day, not from force, but from exposure. Wade stood silent now, mud on his face, anger drained. They were led back toward Dodge City under watch. No longer riding tall, no longer speaking loud. Caleb remained by the river a moment longer. The wind had shifted cooler as the sun dipped lower. He looked across the water and thought about how close it had come to ending differently. Back in town, statements were taken. Papers were read again. Silas Crowley, seeing which way the wind blew, confirmed the payment agreement. He chose his own reputation over Ezekiel's. Ezekiel and Wade were locked behind iron bars that night, not because of fists, not because of a duel, because someone refused to look away. Later, outside the general store, Laya stood beside Caleb under a sky turning purple with evening. "You didn't have to do all that," she said softly. "Yes," he replied, "I did." There was no grand speech between them, no sudden embrace, just a quiet understanding. She was not a burden he had taken on. She was a person who had chosen to step toward light. And he had chosen not to block the path. In the weeks that followed, Laya stayed with Aunt May. She worked in the store. She healed. Slowly, the swelling faded. The bruises turned yellow, then disappeared. Her laughter returned in small pieces at first. Caleb didn't rush her. He repaired fences. He checked cattle. He stopped by the store sometimes with supplies he didn't really need. He kept his distance enough to be respectful, close enough to be present, and something steady began to grow between them. Not loud, not reckless, just steady. "Now, let me speak to you plainly. There comes a time in every man's life when minding your own fence feels easier than stepping across it. I have seen men choose comfort over courage. I have seen good people stay silent because silence keeps the peace. But peace built on someone else's suffering is not peace at all. It is delay." Caleb Mercer was not a hero because he could fight. He was not a hero because he could shoot straight. He became something better when he decided his name would stand for something more than convenience. And I want you to think about that tonight. Where in your own life have you stepped back when you should have stepped forward? Where have you told yourself it was not your concern? Sometimes the greatest thing a person can do is refuse to let fear write the story. Sometimes strength is not pulling the trigger, it is lowering the gun. I believe that. I have lived long enough to know that the choices we make when nobody is cheering are the ones that shape us the most. I have learned that protecting someone's dignity can matter more than winning an argument. And I have learned that reputation built on truth stands longer than reputation guarded by silence. Maybe you are listening to this after a long day. Maybe you are tired. Maybe you have been carrying something heavy. Let this remind you that your integrity still matters, even on quiet days. Laya found her strength the day she ran. Caleb found his the day he stopped pretending it was not his problem. And maybe there is something in your life right now that needs the same kind of courage. Not loud courage, not reckless courage. Just steady courage. The kind that says no more. The kind that says this is where I stand. Drop a comment with your answer. Riverbank, draw or lower your hand. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of a choice you once made or a choice you need to make, take a moment to like the video. Subscribe to the channel so we can keep sharing stories that remind us who we are capable of being. And tell me this, what would you have done on that riverbank? Would you have drawn or would you have lowered your hand? Because in the end, the West was not shaped by the fastest gun. It was shaped by the men and women who chose what kind of people they were going to be.